Hi y'all, we're talking about time and territory management today. And I have Natalie Henson with me. Natalie was a student in my sales communication class, and she's also been an undergraduate learning assistant in the class. And so I thought it would be more fun for us to kind of talk through the slides rather than me just lecturing over the slides. So let's get started. And Natalie, do you want to ask your first question?
Yes, so I was just wondering, can you talk about the importance of sales territories and why it's important to divide the product up and just across the nation or the world?
Yeah. So a lot of times territories can be huge and companies have to decide how they're going to handle them. And so some of the key things to think about here is why they're even developed. And one of the main reasons they're developed is to get coverage. So that you're actually going and visiting your customers on a regular basis. Some other reasons that you do this is to make sure that you reduce your sales expenses, because it could be very expensive to have people flying from the West Coast to the East Coast and back and forth. And so if you segment them and have them cover certain areas, it just makes a lot more financial sense for the company. Now, there are several different types of territories that I also wanted to share with the students. Geography is kind of the obvious one where we talk about flying, and so Edward, as a matter of fact, talked about his territory probably in one of the related videos, and he's an inside salesperson, but he supports a team that covers a Canada territory. And so that's an example of a geographic territory.
Okay.
But there's other types of territories as well. One of them can be industry specific. So you mentioned the Watson product, right? So tell us a little bit more about how that might be either product specific or industry specific, because you mentioned finance, right?
Right. So I was in the financial segment of Watson Customer Engagement, which deals with the largest banks and insurance companies. So I got to travel a lot with that, and where we would go is Chicago because of insurance companies, and then New York because of banks. And so IBM really does a good job of trying to divide you and put you somewhere where that's where the industry is, and not try to fly you from Dallas to Chicago or Dallas to New York all the time, because one, it's not good for you and your sanity, and two, as you said, it's a financial thing. And so being able to, and also just being able to drive to your customer if something does go wrong and something has to come up right away and you have to be there, and not being like, oh, sorry, I have to catch a flight in 3 hours.
Right.
And so just the convenience of being right there helps a lot.
What about, did they ever talk to you about the fact that they put you in the financial segment so that you could understand the industry and so that you could understand how the products fit that need, that industry's needs?
Yeah, so I saw that a lot this summer. I'm obviously not in finance at all, but through it, I was able to understand that I feel like for any sales job, you don't necessarily need to understand finance as a whole, but if you're able to pick up on the benefits of the products and why they're going to be beneficial to the customer, I was able to see, okay, well, this is why insurances or banks would need a customer engagement platform and how we could help and boost their revenue ultimately. And so it's just really interesting that even though I didn't have a big finance background and I was very, it was very daunting to walk in there, but knowing that I've learned so much from it and that everyone's very willing and open to teaching you, I feel like you can learn anything through that.
That's great. So that's industry specific. And then we also have talked, at least in class, a couple of times about this once contacted the customer form. And I'm not personally a big fan of that because I feel like it doesn't develop long-term relationships. But what that means is that if you've reached out and contacted the customer and you haven't gotten back in touch with them in a certain time period, 2 months or a month in some cases, other people can jump in and take over that account from you. But those are just some examples of types of different types of territories. I'll share with you a couple of other dilemmas, and I'm sure that this is something that large companies that people are interviewing with deal with. Sometimes what happens is you have a customer in another country, and they have a headquarters in the US, and they want to be shipping products back and forth, and it becomes this dilemma because where do they buy the product?
Right.
So I remember for me, one of the big issues was my customers in the US would be wanting to ship their products to another country, and they have different power requirements.
Right.
And so whenever someone would start inquiring about oh, I need a different voltage, I knew immediately they were probably sending it to another country. And we actually had agreements with representatives in other countries that we wouldn't sell into their country without their knowledge. And so those are some of kind of these tricky things that we get into that borders also on ethical dilemmas.
Right.
I
You
think
just have to be hyper aware, I
Yeah.
feel like, of everything. And that shows you have to do research and have to really know who your customer is and who you're talking to so that you know kind of where the conversation's going and what the potential outcome could be.
Absolutely. I think that that's really key. There's some other things about territory management. I put together a video on sales quotas and commissions because it's such a complex topic. So what I would recommend is that before anyone actually negotiates and accepts an offer, watch my video. It walks you through that process. And what's frustrating to me is that quite often when my students are frustrated with their first jobs, it's because they didn't ask the right questions
Right.
to understand how they would actually be compensated. So that can be really important. So we're going to cover several more topics today, but let's kick off, and why don't you ask me some other additional questions that you might be curious about?
Can you kind of talk about what account analysis means and like what the importance is in a sales career with that?
Yeah, a lot of times when you're assigned a territory, you need to figure out how you're going to cover your territory. And so one of the most common ways that people do this is through this extra large, large, medium, and small account. And you segment your accounts according to the size of your customer.
Right.
There's also usually kind of an 80-20 rule that you're going to get 80% of your business from 20% of your customers. And that's a challenge because you don't want to ignore your small customers, but you're
Right.
not visiting them as often because they're also not generating as much revenue for
Right.
you. Other kinds of selling that we have that have to do with account analysis, sometimes all of your accounts are about the same and you use the same sales strategy with all of them. That's called undifferentiated selling. And then we also have target accounts or key accounts. And you probably saw some of that,
Yeah, we talked
right?
a lot about that.
Y'all did?
Because I attended a lot of QBRs, quarterly business reviews, and so they would put for the quarter what accounts they were trying to target for that quarter because they knew that there was potential, I don't know,
Yeah.
growth there. And so what was in the pipeline and how we were going to maximize that so we could close the deal by the end of the quarter.
That's great. That's exactly what a perfect illustration of that. The other thing that you want to think about is time. And time plays a really important role here because as a salesperson, you actually want to be very careful with your time and allocate it to doing things that are going to get you what you're rewarded to get and what helps you
Right.
keep your job, quite honestly, as well. So you want to think about, how frequently you're visiting your customer, planning your actual route that you go to within your territory as well.
Right.
And so I thought we'd also spend a little bit of time and talk about time management in general because that's such an important topic. And I know that you and I have had several conversations about the fact that when you first get to college, a lot of people haven't learned how to manage their time.
Right.
So I thought I'd just ask you, Natalie, share with us what kind of strategies you've developed since you're now a senior.
Yes.
And you've had some time to kind of learn about time.
Right. So for me, I grew up as a competitive dancer. So I was dancing 20 hours each week, which I feel like a lot of people can relate to, not necessarily competitive dance, but just being an athlete for high school.
Right.
And so you kind of go from this very structured lifestyle. I was waking up, going to school, come home, do my homework for an hour, go to dance for 5 hours, come home, go to bed. And then I came to college and I had so much freedom and I didn't know what to do with that time.
Yeah.
And I always knew that right after school I was supposed to do my homework, so that's what I did in college. But then no one else was doing it, and I was like, what? Like, why isn't anyone doing this? And so I think I've learned a lot that for me personally, I need to have a more busy schedule because that's how I've learned how to operate and figure out where there's little holes that I can maximize my time and maximize my work in that time. Because if I'm given 3 hours, I'm not going to be as productive if I'm given 30 minutes. And then I think just kind of this summer at IBM, a guy talked a lot about how Monday and Friday should be used for your personal time and to get yourself ready for the week or to close out the week. But then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are your customers' times and being there with your customer and really devoting those times, but also segmenting times on your calendar that show that you are blocked off so that you can have personal time to work on things. Because, even as an intern this summer, people really want to take advantage of you and your ability to do their busy work. And so being able to say, okay, well, I also have this big project that's part of the internship I need to get done. So segmenting time off to do that, but also being available for other works. It's being able to say yes and no to things and being able to manage that time, because I think as a salesperson, you're going to be kind of pulled in multiple directions. And so when you kind of have a strict line of kind of what I want and what I don't want, you're able to work around your schedule more and kind of know who you are, and your customer can appreciate that more.
That makes great sense. So what I'll do is I'll bring it back to some of the things that the textbook has to say specifically about time management and how that relates to sales. There's a great book out there, I think it's called Never Eat Lunch Alone. And it talks about productive lunches. That can actually be great. And for a lot of sales positions where you're outside, you actually have an expense account. And you're expected to take customers out and have lunch with them. It gives you great informal conversations. Other key things are to use your waiting time. So when I lived in California, I lived oh my goodness, I had a large territory with terrible traffic. And so I would leave my house at 5:30 a.m. I know it's dreadful, but I managed. And I would, because I could make it to my first customer in about 30 minutes that time of day. And then I would go to a coffee shop and I would sit and I would do work from about 6 to 7:30, and then I would be right down the road from my customer and I'd go visit my first customer of the day. And so I did a lot of this planning around waiting time and around traffic. So that's an example there. I loved your suggestion about the Monday and Friday, because that can help you streamline your reports. And salespeople usually have a lot of reports that they have to get done. You also use the phone a fair bit to help you manage your time. And then there's this difference between, I mentioned briefly about routing. And routing is kind of your traffic pattern, or your pattern that you're, and the book gives some great examples of how you're planning your visits for your sales calls. Scheduling's a little different. There are some accounts, especially key accounts, where they know that every other week, Tuesday at 10 o'clock, you're going to be there and you're going to be meeting with that specific customer. So I think that kind of wraps up the time and territory management part of content that came out of the textbook. You'll notice that we have lots of kind of interesting snippets for you to explore here. I have a video that talks about Reebok's perspective on time and territory management. I have some information there from other kind of clips that we have related to this. So I hope this will give you a little bit better understanding. And I want to leave you with the thought that actually time management is probably one of the biggest issues that causes salespeople to fail. If you can't manage your time, you certainly can't manage an outside territory. And so a lot of times in interviews, they're actually looking for evidence that you're a great time manager, even whenever you want a sales job. Thanks so much.